A flight attendant slapped a black single dad right in front of his daughter. What she didn't know, he was the millionaire CEO who owned the airline. Why did he stay silent? Why didn't he fight back? And what did his calm dignity cost? Or change forever? This isn't just a story about race, class, or power. It's about the moment a quiet father was publicly humiliated and used that very pain to transform an entire airline. For everyone. You'll witness how a little girl's innocent question shook the skies. How a disgraced flight attendant's cruelty led to a nationwide reckoning. And how one man's refusal to retaliate became the most powerful act of all. If you've ever felt unseen, unheard, or unwelcome, this story is for you. So before we begin, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel, because what you're about to hear might just restore your faith in quiet strength, justice, and the power of compassion at 30,000 feet. Now, let's begin. The hum of Chicago O'Hare International Airport was a chaotic symphony, echoing announcements, rolling suitcases, the scent of cinnamon pretzels mingling with jet fuel. Amid the blur of travelers, a tall black man in a charcoal hoodie and faded jeans knelt to tie the untied sneaker of his daughter. "Hold still, Bug," he said gently. The little girl giggled, her unicorn backpack flopping sideways. "Sorry, Daddy. My foot's wiggly today." Jamal Avery Grant smiled. It was a quiet smile, the kind that held whole worlds. He tugged the knot tight and stood up, reaching for Arya's small hand. She was 6, all curls and questions and humming songs she hadn't finished learning. "Do you think Grandma made the chocolate chip waffles?" she asked, bouncing as they walked. "If I know Grandma." "They're already on the griddle," Jamal replied. He glanced at his watch, a vintage Hoyer Carrera worn, but pristine. A gift from someone long gone. It looked out of place with his clothes, but Jamal wasn't concerned about appearances today, or ever. This wasn't just a trip. This was a bridge to memories, to healing. Arya's mother had died 8 months earlier. Her parents in Texas were all Jamal had left that connected him to her, to Amelia. He carried grief the way only some people do quietly. It lived in his lungs, heavy but breathable. His way of surviving was to show Arya joy, softness, routine. So they were flying Vesper Air Flight 228 from Chicago to Austin, just a father and daughter on a simple journey, to everyone else. Jamal's eyes scanned the terminal as they reached Gate 19B, families clustered in groups. A young couple took selfies near the window. A businessman typed furiously into his laptop, sweat dotting his brow. A voice buzzed over the intercom. "Now boarding all Zone 3 passengers for Vesper Air Flight 228 to Austin." "That's us," Jamal said. He reached for their small carry-on and Arya's purple glitter backpack. She clutched a plush elephant with one arm and skipped ahead a step. As they approached the gate, a flight attendant stood at the boarding counter. Her name badge read, Heather Colburn. She looked up with a smile that didn't quite touch her eyes, the kind of smile that had been painted on too many times. "Boarding passes," she said, monotone. Jamal handed them over. Heather's eyes flicked up to his face, lingered a second too long, then shifted to Arya's bouncing curls. "Any checked bags?" "No," Jamal replied. "Make sure those fit under the seat." "We're at full capacity," she said. "Tone clipped?" He nodded. "Of course." Heather waved them through with the same robotic grace she'd used on every other passenger, except something hung in the air, faint but present. Jamal felt it, that millisecond of pause, that shift in gaze. It wasn't unfamiliar. He gently placed a hand on Arya's back as they entered the jet bridge. Arya's unicorn keychain snagged on her backpack strap and fell to the floor. She gasped and scrambled to pick it up. Oopsie behind them. Heather sighed, audibly. "Let's keep the aisle moving," she said flatly, though they hadn't held anyone up. Jamal said softly, "Sorry about that," and guided Arya forward again. Inside the plane, the air smelled like recycled coffee and sanitizer. Jamal found their seats in 22A and 22B. Arya took the window. He helped her buckle up, tucked her plushie beside her, and handed her a small coloring book filled with dolphins, hearts, and flowers. She started coloring instantly. "Do you think Grandma will let me make pancakes next time I think she'll hand you the spatula herself?" he said. He looked around the cabin. Everything looked normal. Still, something in his gut felt off. The kind of intuition you only develop when you've lived through enough rooms that didn't want you there. He pushed it aside for now. Above them, the captain's voice crackled through the speakers. "Good afternoon, folks. This is your captain, Ron Whitaker. We're expecting a smooth ride to Austin with mild tailwinds. Sit back, relax, and thank you for flying with Vesper Air." Jamal exhaled and leaned back. Arya colored quietly beside him, humming her own tune-off key and perfect. Just a regular father and daughter, off to visit family. At least, that's how it looked. But not everything is as it seems, especially at 30,000 feet. The cabin filled slowly, row by row. Jamal watched people file in, some with neck pillows already in place, others juggling kids or coffees, business travelers murmuring into headsets. The quiet murmurs and overhead bins slamming created a familiar backdrop. Beside him, Arya was coloring a dolphin purple. Her legs kicked gently beneath the seat, and she hummed under her breath. Every so often, she glanced out the window with wide-eyed curiosity, whispering, "I think I see our bags, even though they hadn't checked any." Jamal smiled at her imagination. She reminded him of Amelia Playful, bright, untamed in spirit. And yet, beneath the fatherly smile and relaxed posture, he was watching. His eyes tracked every interaction in the aisle, every shift in tone, every detail. He wasn't paranoid. He was trained. Because long before Jamal was just a father, he'd been something else, a strategist, a builder, a visionary. And while today he wore sneakers and a hoodie, behind the quiet demeanor was the man who'd founded Vesper Air Airlines with his own hands. The planes, the routes, the ethicit was all built from scratch. But today, he was in incognito mode. Every 6 months, Jamal did this, flew anonymously on his own airline to observe the service, the crew, the real experience his customers lived. No special boarding, no ID flagging, just raw exposure. That was how he kept his standards real. And today, he'd already noticed Heather Colburn. He'd seen the slight tension in her jaw when she saw him. The difference in tone between her greeting to the white couple ahead and the way she addressed him. He'd seen it 100 times before, so practiced, so coded that most people would miss it. But Jamal didn't miss it, and he especially didn't miss the sharp look she gave Arya, who was now quietly humming Twinkle Twinkle while coloring a blue heart. Jamal leaned over. "Hey, Skybug," he said, using her nickname. "Remember to use your inside voice." "Okay." Arya nodded, still smiling. "Yes, Daddy." The boarding process wound down. The last group of passengers settled in, and Heather walked briskly down the aisle, inspecting the overheads and snapping compartments shut. She stopped near row 22. Her eyes hovered over Jamal's duffel bag beneath the seat. "Sir," she said with a clipped voice, "make sure your bag is fully under the seat. The cabin must remain clear for safety." Jamal looked down. The bag was already flush against the seat's base. "It is," he said calmly. but I'll double-check. He nudged it with his foot. It didn't budge. Heather didn't respond. She just turned and walked off without acknowledgement. A woman across the aisle looked up briefly, her brow furrowed. She'd noticed it too. Jamal didn't respond outwardly, but inside, he logged it. Not because of pride, but because this was his plane, his airline, and how people were treated on it mattered, especially those who couldn't defend themselves, especially his daughter. Minutes passed. The flight attendants began the safety demonstration. Heather's tone remained hollow, mechanical, as she gestured to seatbelts and oxygen masks. She didn't make eye contact with anyone. Meanwhile, the junior attendant, Naomi Ellis, stood at the back of the cabin, going through the motions too, but with more warmth in her gaze, more presence. Even from a distance, Jamal could tell she was newer, but genuine. After the announcement, Heather began moving back down the aisle with the beverage cart. Naomi assisted from the other side. When they reached row 22, Heather didn't even glance down. "Excuse me," Jamal said politely. "Could my daughter have some water? Please." Heather paused. Her eyes met his, cold and sharp. "We're serving the other aisle first," she snapped. "Please wait your turn." Jamal blinked. The other aisle had already been served. He didn't argue. He just nodded slowly. Understood. She rolled on past. Arya, oblivious, kept coloring. "Daddy, I'm drawing you a sunshine," she said, lifting the page to show him. "That's beautiful," Jamal said softly, his chest tightening, not from pride, but from the sting of watching her light be treated like background noise. A few minutes later, Naomi returned. "Hi there," she said warmly, crouching beside their row. "Would you like some water?" "Sweetie?" Arya nodded. "Yes. Please." Naomi smiled and returned with a small bottle. She handed it over gently, offering a smile to Jamal. "Thank you," he said, his voice low but full of meaning. Naomi caught it. She knew something had gone wrong. Her eyes shifted briefly to the front of the plane, where Heather was pouring drinks without emotion. Naomi nodded and moved on, but Jamal saw it. She noticed. She cared. He made a mental note of her name. The rest of the cabin began to settle. Passengers pulled out laptops and headphones. A few children were louder than Arya Oni, 3 rows behind, was kicking a tray table. Heather said nothing. Arya, meanwhile, was humming again, not loudly, just soft notes in sync with her crayon strokes. And then Heather returned. She stopped by their row again, arms crossed. "Sir, I need you to control your child," she said sharply. "This is a shared environment. Some passengers are trying to work." Jamal looked up. His voice was calm, but firm. "She's 6. She's been quiet and well-behaved." Heather scoffed, not bothering to lower her voice. Basic courtesy goes a long way. But maybe that's too much to expect these days. The insult wasn't in what she said. It was in how she said it. Her eyes never left Jamal's face, but they were really aimed at his skin. The woman across the aisle looked visibly uncomfortable now. She turned away. Jamal's jaw clenched. Not from anger, but from the quiet decision forming inside him. He reached down and adjusted Arya's coloring book. "Daddy," she asked, "did I do something wrong?" "No, baby," he said, kissing her temple. "You're perfect." But his eyes, they were no longer just observing. They were calculating. The cabin of Vesper Air Flight 228 had slipped into that peaceful lull unique to mid-flight. The beverage carts had been stowed, tray tables were down, and seatbelt signs dimmed. A subtle quiet hummed through the plain, faint conversation, the gentle whir of engines, and the occasional clink of ice in plastic cups. But near row 22, that quiet was thinner. Jamal Avery Grant leaned back in his seat, arms folded loosely, eyes half-lidded but watchful. His 6-year-old daughter, Aria, was curled slightly to the side, still coloring, this time a smiling elephant floating under a balloon sky. She hummed again, unconsciously low. Soft notes, nothing more than a whisper. And yet, across the aisle, Heather Colburn glanced back. Her gaze lingered too long. Jamal noticed it. Her jaw was tight. Her lips pursed. Her chest rose with an exaggerated sigh. It wasn't the humming. It was who was doing the humming. Heather rolled her beverage cart past their row again, her movements brisk, performative, purposeful. She handed a ginger ale to a passenger 2 rows ahead, laughed stiffly at someone's joke, and kept moving. But when she reached 22 again, her posture changed. She stopped and leaned in. "Sir," she said sharply, her voice slicing through the ambient white noise of the cabin, "your daughter needs to keep her voice down. This is not a playground." Jamal blinked once. Aria froze, crayon in midair. Her shoulders tightened. The comment wasn't shouted, but in the sterile space of the airplane, it might as well have been. Jamal sat forward slightly, calm, still, but his tone held granite. "My daughter is being quiet. She's humming. She's not disturbing anyone." Heather arched a brow, not backing down. "Other passengers are trying to work or sleep. This behavior is disruptive." Now people nearby were listening. A man with earbuds slid one out. The woman across the aisle stared straight ahead, unmoving. Jamal tilted his head, voice even. "There's a toddler 3 rows behind us screaming every 10 minutes. My daughter's whisper humming isn't the issue here." Heather's eyes narrowed. "It's about courtesy, sir," she said. "And clearly, some people don't understand that." The words hit like a switchblade wrapped in a customer service smile. Jamal felt the heat rise not of temper, but of principle. He'd been here before, in boardrooms, in airports, in banks, microaggressions wrapped in polite wrappers. Today, though, was different. He reached down and adjusted Aria's seatbelt. She was still frozen, her face confused and a little scared. She looked up at him. "Did I do something bad?" He kissed her temple gently. "No, Aria, you're doing just fine." Heather didn't reply. She moved on without apology. Across the cabin, Naomi Ellis, the junior attendant, had noticed. Her eyes flicked between Jamal and Heather. Concern, hesitation, something unspoken passed behind her expression. She wanted to intervene, but she didn't. Not yet. Jamal leaned back, exhaled slowly. Control the storm. For Aria. Always for Aria. 15 minutes passed. The flight was smooth, but something in the air wasn't, Aria whispered. "Daddy, I need to go potty." "Okay. Sweet pea," he said, helping her unbuckle. They stood, Jamal scanning the aisle.
Heather stood a few rows ahead, talking to another attendant, her posture relaxed, coffee cup in hand, gesturing casually. She wasn't blocking the aisle completely, but she wasn't moving either. Just slipped by carefully. "Baby," Jamal murmured. "Say excuse me. Aria, always careful." Edged forward with her little backpack swinging gently behind her. She passed by Heather, careful not to bump her, but the tip of her backpack grazed Heather's elbow. A splash of lukewarm coffee spilled from Heather's cup onto her own navy sleeve, and with that, the fuse lit. Heather turned abruptly, gasping in overacted drama. "Oh, for goodness sake, watch where you're going."
Her voice rose. Arya stopped in her tracks. I'm sorry, she squeaked. Jamal stepped forward quickly, shielding his daughter with one arm. His voice was still even, but low and unshakable. Ma'am, that was a minor accident. She's 6. She apologized. There's no need for this reaction. But Heather was seething. No, you don't get to lecture me after your child nearly douses me in coffee. This kind of entitled behavior is exactly the problem. And then, with her voice sharp and venomous, you people, always playing the victim, always pushing limits. The phrase "you people" exploded in the air like a gunshot. Everything stopped. Arya's eyes filled. Her lip trembled. Jamal inhaled deeply through his nose. Across the aisle, the woman who had witnessed everything dropped her pen. She looked like she might be sick. Heather, face flushed, trembling, still gripping her coffee cup, snapped. You want an apology? She snarled. Then her hand came up, fast, blinding. Crack! The sound echoed down the aluminum cabin. Jamal's head turned slightly from the impact. His cheek stung. The entire row jolted. Arya screamed, a loud, terrified wail that pierced the hush that had overtaken the plane. Gas erupted from nearby rows. One man stood halfway, frozen. Naomi dropped a packet of napkins. Jamal didn't raise his voice, didn't move toward her, didn't blink. Instead, he crouched. He turned Arya gently away from the stairs, pulled her close, and murmured against her curls. It's okay. Daddy's here. You're safe. I've got you. His hand trembled slightly as it smoothed over her hair. Passengers sat motionless, unsure what they had just witnessed. Heather stood stunned, still breathing hard, hand hovering mid-air, as if even she couldn't believe what she'd just done. And then Jamal stood, slowly. His expression was unreadable, but in his eyes, the temperature dropped 10 degrees. No shouting, no threats, just a stillness that felt like the moment before thunder breaks. He turned back to his seat, sat down, pulled Arya into his lap and held her. But behind the stillness, a plan was forming. A quiet, devastating plan. The silence in the cabin was suffocating. For a few heavy seconds, the airplane floated through the clouds as if time had been vacuumed out. Only the distant hum of the engines and the soft, panicked sobbing of Arya Skygrant could be heard. Heather Colburn's hand hung in the air, fingers slightly curled, still trembling from the force of the slap she'd delivered to Jamal Avery Grant. Her face was flushed, part shock, part defiance, part something darker. Her chest rose and fell in sharp, shallow breaths. All around them, passengers were frozen. A few stared openly. Others turned away, unsure whether they'd just witnessed something they should pretend didn't happen. No one moved, except Jamal, still seated, holding his daughter. He lifted his hand slowly to touch his cheek. The sting was there, warm, red, rising, but he didn't flinch. He didn't speak. He didn't curse. He just looked at Heather with a gaze so calm, so unshaken. It was terrifying. And that terrified her more than if he had yelled. Because what Heather saw now was control. Dangerous, elegant control. Arya clung to her father's hoodie, hiccuping as she cried. Her tiny fingers balled in the fabric. I didn't mean to spill, she sobbed. I didn't mean to. Shh, Jamal whispered against her curls. You did nothing wrong. Not a thing. Little one. A soft murmur traveled through the cabin, one row back. A man shook his head. A young woman a few seats away raised her phone subtly. And still, Heather doubled down. Her voice cracked as she turned toward the other passengers, now clearly aware she'd gone too far. "He was threatening me," she barked. "You all saw it. He was aggressive. I had to defend myself." No one responded. Not one person nodded. She turned to Naomi Ellis, who was standing frozen a few rows back, hands still clutching the service cart. Naomi Heather demanded, "You saw it, didn't you?" "He came at me." Naomi blinked, eyes wide, face pale. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. She looked at Jamal, then Arya, then back to Heather. Her expression crumpled in shame. She said nothing. Heather's breathing grew erratic. "I'm calling the captain," she snapped. "This passenger assaulted me. He's a threat to flight safety." She marched to the front of the cabin, wobbling slightly in her heels. Jamal gently rocked Arya in his arms, his cheek still burning, but his voice steady. "Close your eyes, baby. Daddy's got you. Nothing's going to hurt you now." And then he reached into his duffel bag, slowly, deliberately. He pulled out an older model cell phone. No facial recognition, no flash, just numbers, memory, and intent. He angled his body away from the aisle, shielding the screen with his hand, and he dialed 1 ring, 2, then a quiet click. "This is Grant," he said, barely above a whisper. "I'm on Flight 228 en route to Austin. Activate Protocol Nova, Code Red, confirm ownership, manifest, and preposition internal legal. Passenger assault confirmed. Racial bias indicators present. Child witness trauma." A pause. "Arya is safe. I am calm. But this ends when we land." Quietly. Swiftly. He hung up. No theatrics. No rage. Just a reckoning in motion. Up front, Captain Ron Whitaker emerged from the cockpit. A man in his late 50s. His posture suggested authority tinged with exhaustion. He'd flown long enough to think he'd seen everything. He had not. Heather met him near the galley, her voice already in high gear. "Captain, thank God. That man in 22B threatened me, pushed past me in the aisle. His daughter caused a spill. He became hostile. I was forced to defend myself. I've never been so afraid on a flight." Captain Whitaker frowned, eyes narrowing. "He hit you?" he asked, skeptical. "No," she corrected quickly. "But he invaded my space. Verbally combative. Aggressive body language. His child is disruptive. I feared escalation." She didn't mention the slap. Didn't mention you people. Didn't mention the unicorn backpack or the soft humming. Captain Whitaker nodded slowly. He'd flown with Heather before. She was intense, but senior, reliable, mostly. Still, he felt the pressure of command. "All right," he said. "Stay here. I'll speak with the passenger." He walked the aisle with military precision, pausing at row 22. Jamal looked up, still holding his daughter. Arya's sobs had quieted, but her eyes were red, and her face buried in his chest. "Sir," the captain said, voice curt, official. "I'm told there's been an incident. My crew member alleges you were physically threatening and combative. Is this true?" Jamal turned his head slowly. His voice was dead calm. "No, Captain, it is not. She claims you approached her in a threatening manner. I did not move from this row. Did you speak to her aggressively? I spoke as any father would when his child is publicly shamed and frightened for an accident." The captain glanced at Arya, then at Jamal's cheek, still visibly red, and something shifted. There was a missing piece, and Jamal saw it in his eyes. The captain didn't know what had really happened, because Heather hadn't told him. Of course she hadn't. She slapped me. "Captain," Jamal said finally, his tone like ice, "in front of my child, for nothing more than her own fury. You are now accountable for what happens next." The captain blinked. The words didn't come. A ripple moved through the nearby seats. People had been listening, some recording, others whispering. And it was then that Cole Henderson, the COO of Vesper Air, unbuckled his seatbelt in business class. He had overheard enough. He stood up, smoothed his blazer, and began the walk to economy. From his position in the corporate tower, he thought he knew his staff. He didn't yet realize who he was about to confront. Cole Henderson adjusted his tie as he stepped into economy class. As Chief Operating Officer of Vesper Air Airlines, he was used to smoothing out turbulence not just in the air, but in public relations, board meetings, and crew management. Today's flight was supposed to be a routine business trip to Austin, but the whispers he'd heard in business class had unsettled him. A child crying? A passenger slapped a crew member shouting, "Unacceptable!" Whatever it was, it had to be contained fast. He approached row 22 expecting the usual a frustrated customer. A miscommunication. Perhaps a fussy child. But what he found stopped him cold. A little girl, barely 6 years old, sat curled into her father's arms. Eyes red, face blotchy with tears. Her pink unicorn backpack was half unzipped on the floor, a plush elephant dangling out like it had seen too much. And then there was the man holding her. Something about him made Cole pause. Casually dressed, calm, controlled. But there was a stillness in his body that didn't match the usual passenger response to conflict. He wasn't agitated. He was waiting. Cole offered a professional smile. "Sir, I'm Cole Henderson, COO with Vesper Air. I understand there's been a situation Jamal didn't stand. He didn't flinch. He simply nodded once. There has—" Cole glanced toward Captain Ron Whitaker, who was hovering awkwardly nearby. "Captain Whitaker briefed me on a disturbance involving you and our flight attendant, Ms. Colburn. She alleges you were combative and verbally aggressive." Jamal tilted his head. "Is that what she said?" "Yes. That you became confrontational after your daughter caused a spill." Jamal slowly shifted Arya's head to rest on his shoulder. His hand stroked her back. She dropped a keychain. A few drops of coffee spilled on Ms. Colburn's sleeve. "My daughter apologized." Heather responded by yelling at her. When I calmly asked her to apologize in return, she slapped me. He turned his face slightly, enough for Cole to see the red mark still blooming on his cheek. Cole's breath caught. This was not the story he'd been given. He cleared his throat. Did anyone witness this? A young woman across the aisle raised her hand slightly. "I did," she said, voice tentative but clear. "It happened exactly the way he said." "I've been recording since the yelling started." Cole turned to her, startled. "You have a video?" She nodded. "I didn't mean to at first, but I couldn't just do nothing." Jamal turned back to Cole. His voice, still soft, carried authority now. "I've already called my team. Protocol Nova has been activated. I recommend you start preparing for what happens when we land." Cole blinked. Protocol Nova. And then he froze. That code. Only one person could trigger that. He studied Jamal more closely now as darting to the vintage watch, the calm posture, the absolute control in his tone, and then it hit him. Oh my God. This wasn't just a passenger. This was Jamal Avery Grant, founder, majority owner, the man who built Vesper Air from a single leased jet to a national carrier. And Cole had just walked into a fire, wearing a gas-soaked suit. Two didn't realize. he stammered. "Mr. Grant, I didn't know you were on board." Jamal's expression didn't change. Clearly, Cole looked over his shoulder toward the front of the plane where Heather Colburn stood, arms crossed, jaw tight. She still believed she was in control of the narrative, still believed she was safe behind her seniority and uniforms and carefully curated authority. Cole swallowed hard. She doesn't know. Does she?" he asked. "No," Jamal said, eyes never leaving him, "and I'd like to keep it that way. For now." Cole nodded, suddenly sweating. "Understood." Arya stirred slightly in her father's lap. She looked up at him with sleepy eyes and whispered, "Are we almost there?" Jamal smiled softly and brushed a curl from her forehead. "Almost, little bird." He looked back to Cole. "My daughter's safety is my priority. When we land, your team will meet me at the gate. No law enforcement, no press. Miss Lou and legal. Quietly." Cole nodded again, quickly this time. "Of course. I'll make the call. And one more thing," Jamal added. "Yes, sir. Do not let her near my daughter again." Cole turned pale. "Yes, absolutely. I'll have her removed from this section now." Jamal finally looked away, focusing again on Arya. The conversation was over. Cole backed away slowly, retreating toward the front of the cabin, every step a mental review of just how badly this could implode. At the front of the plane, Heather saw Cole approach. He didn't meet her eyes. Instead, he muttered something to Captain Whitaker and gestured toward the galley. Heather followed, still confident, still convinced she had the moral high ground. "I told you he was going to escalate," she whispered urgently. "We can't let this slide. If he's aggressive now, what happens mid-descent?" "What if he snaps?" Cole didn't respond. Heather frowned. "Did you talk to the captain?" "What's the plan?" Cole's eyes met hers, and for the first time since takeoff, he looked deeply uneasy. "We'll handle it," he said. "But for now, I need you to stay in the galley." Heather scowled. "Why, I'm not hiding in the back, like I did something wrong. You're being reassigned to non-passenger duties for the rest of the flight." Her jaw dropped. "What? Until we land, I need you to stay here. No contact with the passengers." Heather's confidence cracked. "I was assaulted." "Cole." His eyes were cold now. "Then you should have nothing to worry about when we investigate." She stared at him, and for the first time, fear crept in. Not because of Jamal, but because something was happening. She didn't understand, and for someone like Heather Colburn, not understanding was terrifying. The atmosphere on Flight 228 had shifted. It wasn't just the recycled air or the hum of engines now. It was the weight of something brewing in invisible front of consequence and truth moving through the cabin. Passengers whispered more freely now. A few exchanged glances. Some were still cautious, unsure whether to get involved. But many had heard or seen enough. And at the center of it all, in row 22, sat Jamal Avery Grant. He hadn't moved much. He cradled Arya in his arms as she dozed off, emotionally exhausted, her tiny face damp and nestled against his chest. One of her crayons had rolled to the floor. Jamal let it lie. His cheek still held a muted flush where Heather Colburn's slap had landed, but he made no move to touch it again. He didn't need to. The sting had already done its job. It had clarified something. It was time to clean house. Up front, Heather paced the galley like a caged animal. She'd lost track of how many times she'd replayed it. Jamal's refusal, the spill, the look in his eyes when he'd stood up after the slap, the way the other passengers had gone still. She clenched her fists. None of them had said anything. Why wasn't anyone supporting her? She turned toward Captain Ron Whitaker, who had retreated into the cockpit. His voice, neutral and drained, had crackled over the intercom a moment earlier, asking passengers to remain calm and prepare for descent. Heather frowned. She was a senior crew member. She had 20 years of experience. She dealt with everything screaming babies, violent drunks, and every flavor of entitlement. But nothing had ever made her feel this off balance. "Cole's got it under control," she muttered to herself. Pacing. "They'll deplane him in Austin. He'll learn he can't treat crew like that. He'll see." Still, her hand drifted to her sleeve, where the coffee stain had dried. It hadn't even been a full spill. Her nerves were unraveling. Meanwhile, Cole Henderson was back in his seat. He couldn't shake the image of Jamal sitting there, calm as stone, issuing orders with no raised voice, no threats, just absolute certainty. It had taken Cole too long to recognize him. Without the tailored suits or the boardroom lighting, Jamal didn't look like the man whose name graced company memos and annual shareholder letters. But he was. And Cole was now sitting on a live grenade. His phone buzzed in his lap. He picked it up quickly. Text from Margaret Liu, head of in-flight services. "Received your message. Legal is assembling at Gate 16. Quiet protocol active. ETA to arrival. 22 minutes standing by." Cole exhaled. This was real now. Heather didn't know it yet, but the plane had already landed for her. She just hadn't stepped off yet. Back in row, 22 Naomi Ellis, the junior attendant, crouched carefully beside Jamal. She'd hesitated long enough. Her voice was low, her eyes honest. "Sir, I just wanted to say I'm so sorry." Jamal looked at her. His expression softened a little. "You don't need to apologize for someone else's actions." She shook her head. "I was there. I should have said something sooner. I was scared of her. But I saw how she treated you both, and it wasn't right." Jamal's voice remained calm. "Speaking now still matters." Naomi nodded. "If anyone needs a statement or witness, I'll talk. I'll tell the truth." He nodded once. "Thank you." She stood again, hands trembling slightly, but she felt steadier. And more than anything, she wanted to do better for Aria, for herself. 15 minutes later, the landing gear lowered with a thump. The city of Austin sparkled in the dusk outside the windows. Inside the cabin, Captain Whitaker's voice returned to the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've begun our final descent into Austin Bergstrom International. Please return to your seats, fasten seat belts, and stow away any personal items. For operational reasons, we ask that passengers in row 22 remain seated after arrival until a crew member speaks with them directly. Thank you." The language was neutral. Too neutral. Heather smirked when she heard it. He was the problem passenger. She could feel it. He was being vindicated. The protocol was clear they'd escort him out, maybe ban him. She'd write a report so tight legal wouldn't be able to touch her. She'd weathered passenger complaints before, but none of those passengers had a child who couldn't stop crying. None of them had disrespected her and made her look like the villain. He had, and now he'd learn. The plane touched down with a smooth bump and rolled to the gate. The chime rang out. Seat belts clicked open, but Jamal remained still. He gently nudged Aria awake. "We're here. Little bird." She blinked up at him, eyes groggy, voice raspy. "Did we get the waffles?" He chuckled softly. "We will. Baby. I promise. Up front." Heather stood confidently near the galley doors, eyes on the jet bridge. She waited for the police, security, someone in uniform. She glanced back at Jamal with a smug little look. But what walked in through the aircraft door wasn't a police officer. It was a sharply dressed Asian American woman with a steel posture and an expression that froze the air around her. Margaret Liu, head of in-flight services for Heir. Behind her were two individuals in dark suits, legal counsel, and trailing behind them was Cole Henderson, pale as ash. Heather's smile cracked and then disappeared. The sound of the aircraft door unlocking was barely audible, but to Heather Colburn, it sounded like salvation. She stood at the front galley with perfect posture, chin slightly lifted, arms folded over her navy blazer. In her mind, this was the moment when order would be restored, when management would take her side, when that man-that father would be escorted off for daring to challenge her authority. But the first person through the door wasn't security. It was Margaret Liu, immaculate in a slate-gray suit. Her dark eyes surveyed the cabin like a battlefield commander assessing the terrain. She didn't smile. She didn't speak. She didn't offer pleasantries. Behind her were two attorneys, both carrying black leather briefcases, and trailing them, with sagging shoulders and a drained expression, was Cole Henderson, Air's COO. Heather frowned. Where were the airport police? She stepped forward. "Miss Liu," she began, her voice high and falsely bright. "I'm so glad you're here." The situation on board Margaret didn't slow. She didn't glance at Heather. She walked right past her, straight down the aisle. Cole followed silently, avoiding Heather's eyes. The legal team paused just long enough for Margaret to give a sharp nod. "Wait," Heather said. "Why are they going back there? Shouldn't they be speaking to me first?" Margaret turned her head slightly, just enough to freeze Heather with a single glance. "We'll speak shortly," she said coldly. "Please remain at the front of the aircraft." Then she turned away. Row 22. Jamal Avery Grant was already standing. Arya held his hand, her tiny fingers still sleepy but secure in his grasp. As Margaret Liu approached, Jamal offered a curt nod. "Miss Liu." "Mr. Grant," she replied, just as formally. "I trust your daughter is all right." Arya blinked up at her. Margaret's tone softened slightly. "Hi there, sweetheart. I'm one of the people who helps make sure this plane runs the right way." Arya nodded shyly, stepping closer to her dad. "She's fine," Jamal answered. "But she's been through enough for one day." Margaret's jaw tightened. She turned to Cole. "Your report, Mr. Henderson." Cole cleared his throat. "We've collected statements from passengers in the surrounding rows. One individual has recorded footage of the incident. I've reviewed a portion of it." Margaret looked to the young woman across the aisle. "May I?" The woman handed over her phone, visibly trembling. Margaret scanned it. The screen showed everything. Heather's confrontation, Arya's apology, the slap, Jamal's calm restraint, the gasp of the passengers. Margaret's lips thinned. She handed the phone back and turned to Jamal. "We will address this fully. I've already secured a private conference room in the terminal. Would you prefer a car ready for you and your daughter once the process is underway?" "Yes," Jamal said. "But I'll stay until Heather is formally removed." Margaret nodded once. "She will be." At the front of the aircraft, Heather waited, arms now stiff at her sides. Passengers were beginning to disembark, streaming past her without a word. Some looked at her. Most didn't. She could feel it, the silence of knowing looks, the invisible wall forming around her. Finally, Margaret Liu reappeared. Her eyes locked on Heather like a missile. "Heather Colburn," she said, voice flat. "Please come with me." Heather blinked. Wait. What you are to be removed from flight duty effective immediately, pending the outcome of an internal investigation? Heather laughed. Short, sharp, defensive. This is ridiculous. You're taking his side. He should be the one. Not a word. Margaret stepped closer. You will hand over your company badge and credentials before you step off this aircraft. Heather paled. What Margaret's voice dropped to a whisper. Deadly, composed. Your actions were recorded. By passengers. By your colleague. You struck a passenger. A parent. In front of their child. That little brat. That child, Margaret snapped, her control cracking for a single syllable, did absolutely nothing wrong. And you may have just jeopardized 20 years of employment with one of the most public and despicable acts of misconduct I've seen in flight. Heather opened her mouth, but no sound came. Margaret turned to one of the attorneys. Mr. Lee, please escort Ms. Colburn off the aircraft. The attorney nodded, stepping forward. Heather's hands shook as she fumbled for her badge. The click of it dropping into the lawyer's hand felt louder than the landing gear. She was walked down the jet bridge in silence. Behind her, a whisper rose low, but clear from a passenger now standing in the aisle. Good. Finally. Back in row 22. Jamal lifted Arya's backpack onto his shoulder and crouched to adjust the strap on her shoe. She yawned, then looked around. Is the mean lady gone? Daddy. He smiled softly. Yes. Baby? She's gone. Margaret returned. Calmer now. Mr. Grant, we'll begin internal proceedings immediately. But I want you to know, this won't be buried. Jamal looked her in the eye. I'm not asking for revenge, but I am demanding change. Margaret nodded. You'll have it. Arya tugged at his hand. Can we still go get waffles? Jamal laughed under his breath. That's the most important mission of the day. They walked toward the front of the aircraft, where Naomi stood near the cockpit door, still in uniform. She looked up as they passed. I'm so sorry, she said quietly. Jamal paused. You stood up. That's what matters. She swallowed hard. I should have sooner. He gave a slight nod. Next time. Speak sooner. Your voice might save someone next time. Naomi blinked. Yes, sir. He walked on. The corridor outside Gate 16 buzzed with muted tension. In the private conference room beyond the glass walls, the air had changed. It was no longer about allegations or protocol. Now, it was about truth, about consequences, about who held the cards and who never had them to begin with. Heather Colburn sat stiffly in a plastic chair at the far end of the table, arms crossed, eyes darting from face to face. Her confidence, once high and unshakable, had eroded into confusion, then disbelief. Cole Henderson sat across from her, a sheen of sweat still glistening on his forehead. His corporate mask was crumbling. His earlier neutrality now looked more like fear. Margaret Liu stood at the head of the table, her posture composed but stern. Beside her, Mr. Lee, one of the legal representatives, clicked open a sleek black folder and laid a set of documents in front of Heather. She looked at them but didn't touch. This is absurd, Heather said, voice thin, teetering on panic. You're blowing this out of proportion. He pushed past me. He was aggressive. I was defending myself. I've been loyal to this company for over 20 years. Margaret didn't flinch. Yes. You've been here a long time. Long enough to know that striking a passenger, especially in front of witnesses, grounds for immediate termination. He made me feel unsafe. No. Heather, Margaret said quietly, he made you feel powerless, and you retaliated. Heather looked to Cole, pleading now, you're going to let them do this to me. I thought you had my back." Cole looked down, and then the door opened. The air shifted again. In walked Jamal Avery Grant. Heather's face twisted with confusion. "Why is he here?" Margaret stepped forward. "Because, Miss Colburn, the man you struck, the man you lied about, the man you tried to have detained," she paused, "is the owner of this airline." The words landed like a thunderclap. Heather's mouth dropped open. What she breathed. "This is Mr. Jamal Avery Grant," Margaret continued. "Founder, principal shareholder, and chairman of the board of Vesper Air Airlines." The color drained from Heather's face. Her mouth opened, then closed again, like a fish out of water. "No, that's not the was in Kochi." He looked. Jamal raised an eyebrow. "Say it," he said quietly. "Say what you saw." Heather stammered. You looked like a regular passenger." "I am a regular passenger," Jamal replied. "But unlike some people, I don't assign value based on seat class or skin color." He stepped forward, placing a hand on the back of the chair across from her. "When I founded Vesper Air, I made a promise that every single person, passenger or staff, would be treated with dignity, regardless of appearance, status, or zip code." He leaned forward. "You broke that promise." Heather's hands trembled. "Untu didn't know who you were." "And that," Jamal said, voice soft but razor sharp, "is the only honest thing you've said today." Margaret opened her folder and slid a set of termination papers toward Heather. "You are hereby relieved of duty effective immediately. Your employment with Vesper Air is terminated pending final review." Heather looked at the paper as though it were written in fire. "You can't do this. You can't just destroy my life over one mistake." "One mistake," Jamal repeated. "You humiliated a 6-year-old child. You slapped a parent in front of 50 witnesses. You lied to the captain and tried to get me forcibly removed. That's not one mistake. That's a pattern." Heather turned to Cole again, desperation creeping in. "You can stop this." But Cole didn't look at her, because he knew. This wasn't politics anymore. This was accountability. "Mr. Lee stood. "You'll be escorted out through the service entrance. Your belongings will be returned to you after security screening." Heather stood abruptly, her chair scraping. "This isn't over. You're making a mistake." Jamal simply looked at her with the quiet finality of someone who had seen the whole truth and didn't need to raise his voice to be heard. "This is the last flight you'll ever take under my sky." And that was it. Heather was let out, a ghost of the authority she once flaunted. Later that evening, in a quiet Vesper Air boardroom 2 floors above the gate, Jamal, Margaret, Cole, and the legal team sat in silence. Jamal broke it. "This wasn't about me," he said. "This was about my daughter. It was about every family that boards one of our planes, trusting us to treat them like human beings." He looked to Cole. "You didn't recognize me. That's fine. But you believed her first. You didn't ask to see the video. You didn't listen to the other passengers." Cole's voice was low. "You're right. I failed. I let bias fill in the blanks." Jamal nodded. "Then your penance is not an apology. It's change. Real change. And you're going to help me build it." Cole swallowed. "Yes, sir." Jamal looked to Margaret. "Let's audit the internal complaint records. Look for patterns. Run a silent survey. Make reporting anonymous. And create a training program not just on rules, but on humanity." Margaret smiled faintly, already in motion. He stood, pushing in his chair. "I want everyone on my staff to know that who they are matters more than what uniform they wear." And with that, he walked out, outside, in the terminal hallway. Arya sat curled on a bench with a juice box in hand. Her unicorn backpack rested beside her. When Jamal approached, she looked up, eyes wide. Did the mean lady get in trouble? He crouched in front of her and smiled. Yes, baby. She got a very big time out. Arya giggled sleepily. Can we go get waffles now? Jamal scooped her into his arms. Absolutely. They disappeared into the crowd, two small figures under a sky that finally felt a little more just. The following morning, the air in Austin was warm and still. Sunlight poured through the wide windows of a cozy two-bedroom home nestled just outside the city. It was modest, filled with family photos, the scent of cinnamon waffles, and a kind of quiet that only comes after a storm has passed. Jamal Avery Grant sat at the breakfast table, a steaming mug of coffee in front of him. He wasn't dressed in business attire or anything suggesting power, just gray sweats and a soft t-shirt with faded college lettering. But in his stillness, there was weight. Across the table, Arya Sky Grant picked at her waffle with a fork shaped like a giraffe. The morning cartoons played in the other room, low but cheerful. She hadn't said much since waking up. That silence wasn't unusual, for Ariyashi was thoughtful, observant, the kind of child who carried more than she let on. But today, Jamal sensed something different in her quiet. He took a sip of his coffee and waited. Arya looked up. Daddy. Yes, baby. She tilted her head, curls falling into her eyes. Why did the airplane lady hate us? Jamal set his cup down. His chest tightened, not with anger, but with the ache of knowing that this question had arrived too soon. He had hoped, maybe a few more years. Maybe she could be shielded just a little longer. But the world had its own plans. He reached across the table and gently squeezed her hand. That's a really good question. Was it 'cause of my backpack? She asked, glancing at the unicorn lying on the floor beside her chair. Or the humming? No, he said. Your backpack is perfect, and your humming is beautiful. Then why he paused, choosing his words with care. Sometimes, he said slowly, people carry hurt inside them, hurt they never deal with, and that hurt turns into anger, and that anger turns into something worse, like treating other people badly. Arya blinked, but she didn't even know us. That's the hardest part, Jamal said. Some people don't need to know you to decide they don't like you. They see something about you, your skin, your name, your joy, and they make a decision before you even speak. Is that fair? No, he said. It's not. It's the opposite of fair. She thought for a moment. But she got in trouble, right? She did. But you didn't yell. He smiled gently. You don't always need to yell to fight back. Arya nodded slowly, then looked down at her waffle. Jamal rose, walked around the table, and knelt beside her chair. Listen to me. Skybug. What happened on that plane? It wasn't your fault. Not even a little. You were brave and kind, and you told the truth. That matters. She met his gaze. You're proud of me. I'm proud of you every single day. She smiled, small but genuine. Can I have more syrup? He laughed softly. That's my girl. Later that day, Jamal sat alone on the back porch. He'd spent most of the morning answering emails, reviewing early drafts of HR policy revisions, and confirming a meeting with Margaret Liu to initiate the new empathy training framework. But now he just needed quiet. He stared out across the backyard. Arya's sneakers lay in the grass where she'd kicked them off after chasing bubbles. A wind chime danced softly in the corner. It was the kind of peaceful that always made reflection easier and heavier. He reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out his phone. There was a message waiting. From Margaret Liu, formal termination processed. FAA notified. Incident logged. I've also drafted a personal apology letter to you and Area. Let me know if you'd prefer to deliver it yourself or have it mailed. Jamal didn't respond right away. He wasn't interested in apologies from Heather Colburn. He was interested in lasting change. He opened another email, this one from Naomi Ellis, the junior flight attendant. Subject: thank you. Mr. Grant, I just wanted to say thank you again for your kindness, your calm, and for not letting me stay silent. I was scared of speaking up before, but after everything that happened, I'm not going to stay quiet anymore. If there's anything I can do to help with the new training, I'd be honored to be part of it. Naomi Jamal smiled softly. That was the real beginning. That evening, he took Arya out for ice cream. They sat on a bench in downtown Austin, just as the sun dipped low and painted the city in gold. Arya held a double scoop of strawberry in a waffle cone. Jamal's was black cherry. She swung her legs and watched the birds glide above them. Daddy. Do you think airplanes will ever be nicer? He looked at her. I think they already are. She raised an eyebrow. Oh, 'cause one day, a little girl with a unicorn backpack reminded a whole airline what kindness should look like. Arya giggled. That sounds like a story. It is, he said. And we're still writing the ending. 2 weeks later, the headquarters of Vesper Air Airlines in Dallas looked different, not physically, but in energy. In the executive boardroom, where once glossy presentations and quarterly charts dominated, today the mood was far more personal. The air was charged not with corporate ambition, but with introspection. Jamal Avery Grant sat at the head of the table knot as a mysterious observer, not as a quietly traveling single father, but as himself. The founder, the man who, until recently, many of them hadn't recognized, and some hadn't respected. Now, there was no confusion. The screen behind him glowed with the words, "Dignity is not optional." Vesper Air's internal human ethics reform. Around the table sat Margaret Liu, Cole Henderson, 2 members from the Diversity and Inclusion Office, junior flight attendant Naomi Ellis, and 3 passengers from the infamous Flight 220 voluntarily invited to share their perspectives. Jamal stood up, not needing to clear his throat. I want to begin by saying, this isn't just about one incident, he said. It's about the culture that allowed it to happen. He clicked the remote. A bar graph appeared, showing internal complaint data highlighting disproportionate rates of dismissal or ignorance when bias-related grievances were reported, especially from Black, Latino, and disabled passengers. A ripple of discomfort moved through the room. This data didn't lie, Jamal continued, but too many of us ignored it, myself included. I thought my founding values would be enough to steer the ship. I was wrong. Intent isn't, leadership systems are. Margaret leaned in, speaking next. Our first action, she said, is mandatory trauma-informed empathy training, not just for flight crew, but for executives, starting next Monday. Heads nodded, some reluctantly, but all understanding the weight of change had finally arrived. Naomi cleared her throat. I also think we need a bystander protection clause in our whistleblower policy. When I saw what happened to Mr. Grant, I wanted to speak up, but I was afraid for my job. Jamal nodded slowly. You shouldn't have been. The room fell silent again. Then one of the passengers, a soft-spoken woman in her 60s named Gloria Wren, spoke. I was in row 18. I've been flying for decades, and I've seen women like Heather before. You just never think it'll go that far. But I'll tell you what scared me most It wasn't the slap. It was that so many people looked away when it happened. Another man beside her added, "You need to give passengers a voice, too. A simple way to speak up, like QR codes on seats for anonymous feedback in real time." Cole Henderson scribbled that down. Jamal looked around the table. This is the beginning. Not a PR play, not a one-time apology, but a reset. Oh, we're going to be the airline that doesn't just fly people safely. We're going to see them fully. 3 floors down, in a training room flooded with soft lighting, the first session of the restructured Empathy and Inclusion program was already underway. Naomi stood in front of a small group of new hires. On the whiteboard, she had written, "You are not just enforcing rules. You are welcoming humans." She shared her story, not naming names, not seeking sympathy, but painting a picture of what fear looked like on a plane and what it took to act anyway. The room was riveted. One young flight attendant in training raised his hand. But what if the passenger is aggressive? What if you're scared too? Naomi nodded. Good question. That's when you listen first. Slow down. Your fear can't be an excuse to strip someone's dignity. That's the difference between control and care. Back in his office, Jamal stared at a small photograph on his desk. It was one of him and Arya, taken last Christmas, her laughing wildly, him mid-laugh, barely able to hold her upright. It reminded him of what truly mattered, not just restoring trust, but protecting innocence. He picked up his phone and dictated a message into his notes app. You build an airline the same way you build a home, with care, with listening, with people who are brave enough to stay human in the face of power. He hit save. That evening, as Jamal returned home, Arya met him at the door in socked feet and pajamas covered in tiny constellations. "Daddy," she squealed, "I drew something for you." She led him to the kitchen, where a crayon drawing sat taped to the fridge. It showed a little girl with brown curls, holding hands with a tall man. Above them, an airplane with a smiley face flew through a sky of blue. Beneath it, she had written in uneven letters, "Vesper heir, the nice sky." Jamal knelt down, wrapped her in his arms, and whispered, "That's exactly what we're going to be, baby." From now on, 3 weeks after the incident, the headlines finally caught fire. Airline exec slapped by his own staff and no one knew who he was. The Atlantic Vesper Air CEO breaks silence. After in-flight assault, we failed more than one passenger that day. NBC News, from discrimination to reform. How one father changed the skies. New York Times. The media storm came not from Jamal himself, but from a leaked video recorded by a quiet, anonymous passenger in row 17. The moment of the slap, the hush, the way Jamal Avery Grant didn't retaliate, only lifted his daughter into his arms and walked away. It hit the internet like a lightning bolt. And for the first time, the world saw not just the action, but the pause after it, the stillness, the restraint, the power of quiet resistance. Within 24 hours, the story had over 9 million views. Jamal's team had urged him to make a public statement. He waited until the world wasn't just curious, but ready to listen. He stepped onto the small stage in a press hall outside Austin, dressed simply in a navy pullover and jeans. No teleprompter, just a single mic and his presence. The room quieted. He began. 3 weeks ago, my daughter and I boarded a plain Vesper Air Flight 228. I wasn't traveling as an executive. I was traveling as a father, as a black father, with a little girl who hums when she's nervous and carries a backpack shaped like a unicorn. On that flight, we were targeted, first with condescension, then with control, and finally, with violence. He paused. What hurt wasn't just the slap. It was watching my daughter look up at me, confused, and ask, "What did we do wrong?" A hush fell over the crowd. The answer was nothing. But this country has long had a way of making people like us feel like existing is too loud, too much, too inconvenient. That's why I'm not just speaking as a CEO. I'm speaking as a man who's been stopped, silenced, and shoved aside before. I've built companies, sat at conference tables, donated to causes, but when I sat in 14C, none of that protected me. Because dignity, he said, should not depend on your resume. Cameras clicked, reporters sat frozen. Some even cried. "We are changing the airline," Jamal said finally, not as a gesture, but as an apology, not just to me or to Arya, but to everyone who has ever been dismissed while traveling simply because of who they are. And then he left the stage. No Q&A, no corporate polish, just truth. The internet erupted. On social media, the hashtags trended globally. Dignity is not optional. Flying while black. Vesper air reform. Some comments were full of praise. Some, rage. But something shifted. Teachers began sharing their stories of discrimination while flying. Nurses, veterans, mothers with autistic children, deaf travelers, even other CEOs who, like Jamal, had been mistaken for assistants or janitors on their own jets. But with the spotlight came scrutiny. Opposition columnists accused Jamal of orchestrating a PR stunt. A few called him the crying billionaire. Others mocked his message as corporate wokeness. Jamal didn't respond. He didn't need to. The policy changes spoke louder. All flight crews now had embedded de-escalation officers. Anonymous passenger reporting was live. Quarterly diversity audits were made public. Most importantly, a new position was created, Chief Officer of Passenger Dignity, to report directly to Jamal, independent of HR or PR. And the first person appointed Naomi Ellis. A week after her promotion, Naomi walked into Jamal's office with a nervous smile. "You really trust me with this?" she asked. "I trust people who act when they're scared." He said, "That's who this needs." She nodded. "Then I'm ready." That same day, Jamal took Arya to a small bookstore cafe. No media, no press, just the two of them. He bought her a picture book about brave girls who changed the world. She flipped through the pages, then looked up and asked, "Can I be in a book someday? You already are," he whispered. That night, Jamal sat on his porch. The cicadas buzzed. His phone buzzed too. It was a text from Heather Colburn. "I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted to say I watched the video. I saw my face. I saw what I became, and it broke me. I'm in therapy now, trying to become better. I don't know if that matters, but thank you for not becoming like me." Jamal stared at the message, then turned his phone face down. He didn't reply, not out of malice, but because some apologies are better left unanswered, not out of revenge, but release. 6 months had passed since that day in the sky. Vesper Air was no longer just another airline. It had become a case study in business schools, a symbol in op-eds, and, quietly, a source of hope for passengers who'd spent too long feeling unseen. But for Jamal Avery Grant, it was never about headlines. It was about legacy. Inside a modest hangar just outside Austin, a small private event was underway. No media, no suits, just Jamal, Naomi, a dozen newly certified crew members, and a single aircraft gleaming under soft lights. The aircraft had a new name printed across its fuselage, the Arya Sky. Not Vesper 120, Not Jetmark series. Just her name, and what she stood for: wonder, imagination, and the right to fly without fear. Naomi handed Jamal a small plaque, etched in brushed steel. To those who rise, even when the world tries to ground them. In honor of Flight 228. He held it in both hands, overcome for a moment, then passed it to Arya, who stood beside him in a little denim dress and gold sneakers, holding her dad's hand. "Do you like it?" he asked softly. She nodded with bright eyes. "It looks like me. It is you." He smiled. Later that evening, as Jamal stood watching the sun dip below the airfield, Margaret Liu approached him. "You ever think this would be your most important venture?" she asked, half teasing. Jamal chuckled. "I used to think legacy was about numbers, products, IPOs." He turned to look back at the plane. "But this is about the kind of world I leave for her." Margaret nodded. "You've done something rare. Jamal, you took the pain and didn't throw it back. You rewrote the rules instead." He was quiet for a moment, then said empathy isn't weakness. It's the only force strong enough to lift us higher than ego. In the months that followed, the Arya Sky became more than just a symbolic planet, became the flagship for Vesper Air's reform mission. Flight crews who served on it had to undergo special human-centered certification, which included workshops with survivors of travel discrimination, psychological safety training, and conflict de-escalation based on dignity, not dominance. On board, small touches mattered. Braille menus, noise-canceling earphones for neurodiverse passengers, sensory kits for anxious children, and flight staff trained to notice, not police. Passengers began leaving messages in the seatback suggestion cards. I cried when the flight attendant knelt to speak to my nonverbal son like he was royalty. "Thank you, Marcia T. Seat 7A. My hijab didn't make me a threat here. It made me a guest. I haven't felt that in years. Yasmin R. Seat 14F. I never thought flying could feel kind. Elliot W. Seat 21C. One evening, flying back from Chicago, Jamal sat quietly in seat 210 announcement. No entourage, just a father, again, beside his sleepy daughter. As Arya dozed against his arm, a young black flight attendant approached slowly, uncertain. "Mr. Granny whispered. Jamal looked up. "Yes, I just wanted to say I got into aviation because of you. I didn't even know this world had space for someone like me until you made one." Jamal smiled, offered his hand. "There's always been space. They just needed someone to open the cabin door." The final moment came on a rainy night in Atlanta. A private dinner was held not for press, not for investors, but for the 34 staff members who had personally reported misconduct in the past, long before Jamal's incident, and had been ignored. He stood at the front of the room and said, "I owe you all something. No one gave you then belief. You weren't loud. You were right. And from now on, you're not just heard. You're part of the system shaping how we treat people." Tears were shed. Forgiveness was given not because the past was forgotten, but because a better future was being built together. Back home in Austin, Arya's drawing still hung on the fridge. Only now, it had a tiny update in red crayon Vesper Air, the nice sky, with room for everyone. Sometimes justice doesn't come with shouting. Sometimes it walks in quietly, holding a child's hand, and builds a new sky where everyone belongs. Jamal Avery Grant didn't fight back with fists. He fought with truth. He didn't seek revenge. He chose reform. And because of that choice, thousands of passengers now fly with dignity because one father refused to be broken. This story isn't just about what happened on Flight 228. It's about what happens when someone finally says enough. Not again. Not in my name. So as you return to your day, remember real change rarely roars. It speaks gently, firmly, and never lets go of what's right. If this story moved you, like the video, leave a comment with your thoughts or personal story, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next powerful journey we share. Until then, stay strong, stay kind, and may your skies always be open.